Hello everybody, welcome to our Big Give Christmas Challenge webinar today on developing your Christmas Challenge proposition. My name's Janine, I'm from the FSI, so I might have met some of you in previous years' webinars or indeed in one that we did on Friday around targeting your audiences, and you may have also joined an earlier webinar with my colleague Lindsay. So I'll give you a quick run through just what to expect over the next hour or so, and then we'll jump into the content proper, which is really all about developing your messaging or your proposition for your Christmas Challenge campaign. So really helping you think about how to get your message across effectively, and we'll be looking at lots of examples from people who have been in the participated in the challenge in previous years. So a big shout out to South London Cares. We've got the Haven, Wolverhampton. We've got a few other examples that I'll highlight throughout, but if you're joining us from there, thank you. We've had some great, I suppose the examples that we'll be sharing are from those who have participated and run successful campaigns in previous years. I've had a couple of messages from people to say the sound isn't working. Rachel, do you mind just posting onto the chat the telephone number dial-in details for Zoom. So if you're accessing through computer sound, it might be to do with your Wi-Fi connection or something, but there is also a telephone number you can join, or actually you can manage that yourself. If you go into your sound settings, you can switch to phone audio and a little pop-up will come up with a number to dial into. So that's an option if you're struggling to hear. I'm getting messages coming through that the sound seems to be working for others. So so it might just be something at your end. Just have a play around with your audio settings. So the format today, we're going to be, we're here for an hour, we've blocked out. It depends on, we can get into quite a lot of discussion about the case study, so we may get through it a little bit faster, and there's time for Q&A. So I'll sort of take pauses throughout the webinar for questions and answers, but also there will be time towards the end as well. Everyone's on mute. We do have upwards of 100 people registered for this webinar. So just to avoid talking over one another, we've sort of set at our end everybody on mute. So you can use the Q&A function. I'm on hand to answer sort of topic related questions. And we've got Rachel from the Big Give as well, who's answering any sort of process or technical questions relating to the Christmas Challenge from their side. So you should get answers either from myself or Rachel. We will share with you the slides and the Q&A afterwards, and do keep an eye out for more webinars coming. We've got another one on Friday and more next week. Friday or Thursday, we'll double check when we get to the slide. We've got a slide with the links to book, and I would, use the time wisely. Make sure you ask questions, and as we go through, if it's sort of sparking off ideas and inspiration, just make sure you've got a notebook, or you could be using your marketing guidebook, which you can access from your dashboard as well. So I'm just going to see, I think Rachel's trying to locate the dial-in number. I think I'm just going to see if I've got them handy to share. Bear with me one moment. Okay, so I'm just typing it in now. So I've just popped into the chat box the telephone number that you can call in if your computer audio is not working, and you should be able to dial that from any mobile or landline number. It's a UK number, so obviously if you're joining us internationally, just do the country code, the +44 in front, and drop the 0. So first of all, well done for getting this far and all the hard work that's gone into it so far. I know for many it's a process that starts a way back. So I know this is just a sort of one step in the process. Just a reminder that the campaign dates this year run from the 3rd to the 10th of December, midday on both days. And your dashboard is the key place to go to access the resources to help you market the campaign. So you just log into your charity account and navigate to your dashboard from there. Just a reminder of how the matching works in campaign week. So you've got your pledge funds, and if you've been successful to have champion funds as well, you've got those in your pot. So that's your match pot. When you launch, your donations to the charity are first matched by the pledges. So those are exhausted first before going to your champion funds. That means that you want to plan in your campaign to make sure that you exceed your pledge funds as the match pot, so that you can actually start accessing those champion funds. So you've got to exhaust the pledges before you access the champion funds. And of course, if you haven't received champion funds, you'll have your pledge funds in your pot to match donations. So today's webinar, as I say, is all about developing your proposition, and just a few sort of key tips and pointers here. There's a huge amount of research that shows that the personal stories, conveying human stories and emotions, is the greatest sort of compelling fundraising ask, if you like. And there's been research that has shown that showing the impact on an individual is more powerful than showing it on a group of people. So really thinking about how you pull out those personal stories is absolutely vital. There was one, I read one piece of research that sort of looked at 3 different groups. It was an academic study that had 3 different groups of donors, I suppose, or prospective donors that were being experimented on. So one group got a very emotive story of one individual. One got a very factual kind of statistics-based proposition, and a third group had both, had the statistics and the stories. And it was interesting, the group that had just the personal stories actually had people were more likely to donate, and the donation amounts were higher with that particular group. So, you know, as human beings, we connect to stories of other human beings. And I think it's just about remembering that your proposition has to communicate to individuals and encourage and inspire them to give. And you do need to have, as part of that story, there are the facts and the stats, but the thing that will really get people's attention are those personal stories. So really think about the impact of your work on someone's life and how you tell that effectively. And I'm going to talk you through a tool that can be really helpful for that. It's really useful to remind your audience that their donations are doubled. It's a powerful motivator. Again, research shows that this match funding increases the likelihood of someone donating, as well as the amount of that donation. But that can't be in isolation to those personal stories and those good, strong fundraising asks. This year, we're actually doing something big, the Big Giver doing something different. So keep an eye out if you're a Twitterer. Keep an eye out on Twitter today on the Big Gives account for a poll coming out in terms of what the campaign slogan should be. You'll recall from previous years we've had one donation, twice the impact, for example. So they're polling on that today, so keep an eye out. But if you do, I would encourage you to use the slogan that is adopted by the Big Give, just because it will help you reach, you can use the hashtags, you can sort of join that whole momentum and movement around that. It's really important to include a clear call to action, and it sounds obvious, but make it clear to your audience, whoever you're communicating with and however you're communicating with them, make it clear what you want them to do. So if it is your messaging that's going out before the campaign, you may want to make it really clear that you don't want them to donate just yet. You want them to save the date. If it's during the week itself, do you want them to donate? Do you want them to share? Is it a combination of the two? But make sure that every piece of communication that you send is very clear about what you're asking people to do, and make it easy for them to do it. It's really helpful to start building up now your bank of content and stories that you can use. I'm off to a trustee meeting this afternoon where the organisation I'm a trustee of is participating in the Big Give, and we've set aside half an hour in our meeting to do a bit of brainstorming around messaging. So, you may not have, like ourselves, we're a busy small team. We don't have a lot of additional time to put into the planning, but we're making the most of the opportunities we have. So start to develop that bank of content and stories that you can use now, so that you can get yourself as prepared as possible for the week, and get all of that stuff ready to go. And keep it visual. Again, we know that images and video really help with the content. It helps with spreading the message and getting the word out there, and reaching audiences that you might not be able to directly reach, but having people, creating that sort of shareable content, and where people can access information in interesting and different ways, is really, really helpful for your proposition as well. And this year we've taken a slightly different approach. So if you were on, if you've participated in previous years, you might recall that we've talked about sort of the fairy tale elements of fundraising propositions, the key ingredients to any good story. But we came across something from Becky Slack, who, if you participated last year, you might remember she delivered a webinar on press and PR. And she does a lot of workshops around key messaging generally for marketing and communications, and a tool that she's sort of come up with that she uses in her workshops, that I've seen in action and seen work really well, is this one, as for the need plus solution equals impact, and call to action in brackets, if you like, as a don't forget that. Now, this is a really useful framework for coming up with your proposition. So the first thing is about being clear about what the problem is that your beneficiaries are facing. This is not about your organizational needs. This is not about your funding shortfall, but it's about the needs ideally expressed from the point of view of one person or one animal or one species or green space, whatever your cause is, but thinking about that from the perspective and something that people can connect to. Then your solution, how do you help to solve that problem? What are you directly doing? What will someone's donation pay for that is going to help that person or animal or community to overcome the need? And then that leads to the impact. So what is the impact of that person's donation? And that's why it's sort of in that way that it's the need and the solution that you offer that gives the donor the opportunity to create an impact. So what's going to change because of this person's donation? Why does it matter to that audience? And of course, it needs to be followed up with that clear call to action. What do you want someone to do because of the story that you've told? So let's look at some examples from previous years. So I've got, first and foremost, a couple of screenshots from South London Cares, who actually won the Planning and Supporter Engagement Award last year. So a lot of good learning to come from them. So you can see here, this is just a screenshot of one of their Facebook posts. So there's a bit of an introductory, it's actually got the call, sort of a soft call to action at the start: donate today and your donation will be doubled. We're asking for your help. But then it goes into, and you can see in that middle paragraph, that formulation of the need. So 2.9 million older people in the UK feel they have no one to turn to. And they've really brought that sense of winter to life. You know, it's long, dark nights and cold weather. So that's the need. Then the solution: every year we run our winter wellbeing project. And that's then the impact: keeping people over 65 warm, active, healthy and connected. And they've used their video in this because the need is actually being evidenced through the stat here, about 2.9 million older people. But the way that they've brought the people into it is about being able to hear from these neighbours just how important that connection is, so what it means to them. And I think it's a really interesting video title: what does South London Cares mean to your neighbours? So it's making it really personal to the audience. And then it finishes with a clear call to action: donate now. Really simple, very assertive, declarative, not consider donating now, just donate now, and a link to that, an easy to follow link. So I particularly liked that example. I think it illustrated good use of the video, but also how you can really get that point across in something as short as a Facebook post. So moving on to, this is now an e-shot that went out to their database. So this is the launch. The challenge is now open. You can see some really prominently placed donate now buttons at the top, midway through, and then a link down the bottom. So again, the need being the toughest time of the year, and hear from some of your neighbours. Again, reiterating, these aren't my neighbours or random people. They are people that are in yours and my neighbourhood that we should help. And we need your help to connect more neighbours like Peter, Michael and Alhaji. Again, reiterating that point about doubling donations, and the ability to make, for the donor to make double the difference to your older neighbours that winter. And I think that's a really strong call to action and ask. And at the bottom, you can see there's some really tangible asks linked to specific donation amounts. So the £10, the £20 and the £50. So almost approaching that in this instance, the donor is providing the solution that's going to have that impact. I also really liked in this one, the text is quite light, so recognising that people might be accessing this email through their smartphones. You know, the way that we read and digest information we receive over email has changed so much over the past years, and it's really important to consider how people will be accessing that information. So there's a lot of visuals. The text is broken up really well, and it's very, very focused. I think it's very personal and warm, so it uses our and we and you. It uses very accessible language, but it paints a picture. So I think some really good illustrations there of some of those key principles. In the next screen, I've got an example from the Nestling Trust. What I haven't got here is the full email this is just an extract from it. So it's an extract from a newsletter. So the call to action isn't shown, and I'm sure there would have been images and things used in the email, but this is just the copy. So again, there's a good use of your need. Imagine that you had to, so really putting the donor into that situation. This is the situation that many people will face. And then it goes into the solution. We're going to be able to raise money for our project, establish and staff this health clinic, and bring basic healthcare and health education to a remote mountain village. But it then talks about, for the first time, this is the impact that this is going to have on this community. And again, linked to some tangible gift asks. So again, just an illustration of how those four, if you include a donate to sort of a donation call to action, those four elements knit together to tell a story. And another example here from the Haven in Wolverhampton. And again, it's got the different elements. You can kind of see there's some intro. So this one is written, it's written from the perspective of someone. It's very personal. It's someone in the office. It's a staff member, a team member, connecting to. This is actually a pledge email, so not the type of email that you'll be sending because you've collected your pledges by now. But I still think has some useful learning. So you can see in there's a seasonal rise in incidents of domestic abuse in that kind of middle third paragraph down. People having to flee their home at a moment's notice for the safety of themselves and their children, then bringing in the kind of the solution. And again, some good language in there about, transforming our hub into a magical Christmas grotto to make the holidays special, connecting it to the impact this is going to be for some of the people, the first Christmas they've experienced. And we want to give women and children the Christmas they deserve. I think that's really, really powerful. And again, some examples of what that means. Is it a 3-course dinner? The things that we might take for granted. Receiving gifts, parties and festive activities, 3-course Christmas dinner with all of the trimmings. So really, again, good example of knitting together those different elements. So before we jump into the next sort of slide, which is more about how do you get people's attention, I just thought it's worth pausing at this stage just to see, has anyone got any questions? Has anyone had a go at sort of using this or maybe some other good storytelling mechanisms or things that they've done with their team to come up with some of their messages? Just if anyone's got any ideas and tips to share, you could share those in the chat function. That would be really fantastic. Or if you've got some questions about how you might approach doing some of this, if you're sort of staring at a blank sheet of paper at the moment, now's your chance to ask away. I'm going to pop myself on mute for a minute or two just to give you guys a chance to respond. So don't panic if things go quiet. So we've had a couple of questions come through that I'll start by answering, but please do others chip in as well. So I'll start with Holly's question about how do you make campaigns more personable when you're trying to generate larger amounts of donations. So if your match pot is 40,000. Without knowing the breakdown of that match pot, Holly, I think I guess it starts with a bit of a breakdown of maybe thinking about your different sort of gift segments. So you might have different messaging, within that match pot of 1,000, you might be targeting a small number of people to give 500 or £1,000 each. And they might be receiving different communications from you and much more personalized communications than, say, those that you're asking to donate 10, 25, £50. So I think it starts by breaking down that target and understanding, how many gifts at the different levels are we targeting and who's our audience in each of those segments and how are they reaching them? Because for those higher level donors, that might be more through much more personalized communications rather than them simply getting your standard email that's going out. And then I suppose whatever the level of gift, it's about connecting it to something tangible. So how is that going to make a difference in what you're trying to achieve through your project, whether it's through a space, whether it's through a building, an individual or group of individuals, a community, or animals. Next question from Kate. But again, if others have thoughts on that, please, or anything that they could share with Holly, please do add to that. We've got a question from Kate around a heritage charity. We use a couple, I think in the guidebook, we might use a couple of examples from heritage charities, but if not, it's well worth just dropping info at the biggive.org UK a line, and I'm sure there's some things we can share from previous webinars that we've done on this. But I suppose, again, please others do chip in. But I suppose it's again connecting it to what is it about that building or whatever it is that you want to do with that building, with the funds that have raised, that is going to connect emotionally to those individuals. So remember the things, and often it's the hardest thing to do, I think, is to step away, particularly when you're team and your trustees are probably very passionate about the space. Think, well, what actually is it that will inspire a wider group of people to donate? So is it about preserving the heritage? Is it about creating, ensuring that there's a legacy for future generations? Is it about sustaining the energies and the effort that's gone in through volunteer hours and support? I suppose it's just thinking around and maybe doing a bit of brainstorming around, well, what's the impact aspect of the story that you want to tell? Because I think once you know the impact, you can sort of work backwards through the need and the solution in that case. I don't know if that's been helpful or not, Kate, sorry. But I just wonder if others, we've had a great tip in actually from Ecologia, which is if you have visitors, tell their stories, tell the history of the place. So again, people are always connected to, even when we're talking about historic sites or heritage sites, the reason we're preserving this heritage is there's people involved in it. So tell their stories, whether it's the visitors, whether it's the heritage that you're preserving and the history, find that human element to it. Tips, Zoe's after any tips to avoid the pity narrative. I think that's so important, and again would be really great if others have ideas and tips to chip in here, but you have to strike that balance, don't you, between, I suppose, what sometimes can feel like almost exploiting beneficiaries and their sort of tales of woe to elicit support, and wanting to present them as, people with agency in their own lives as well. So, but I think you can do that sensitively. I think you as an organisation, or any organisation, probably needs to be clear on what stories you will and won't tell. And I think you can talk, about the impact that a particular issue or challenge is having on someone's life without exaggerating or going over the top or painting, this desperate picture of poverty or need, that if it weren't for you as this rescuer charity coming in. I think that's, that's the bit where sometimes those fairy tale structures for coming up with stories almost become quite dangerous, because you can sometimes fall into that pity narrative. So I think, it's about the need, but why is that need important to that individual, and how does what you do help them create agency in their lives, I suppose, would be something to include in there. But if others have tips, if you've got things or guidelines that you've used internally, things that have helped you, would really love to hear them. We've got a question from Gemma about experience of using the Christmas Challenge to fundraise for a well-established service. I think, again, it's about showing the impact for the service and clearly demonstrating the need. If you're doing that well, then whether it's established, some of the examples that we've had look through. So, the Christmas from the Haven, just flicking back up to the South London Cares, this is ongoing work that they're doing. So although they've sort of presented it as a project, I think it's about how you package and sell that, and don't be, I think don't be at too many pains to over explain. What you really want to do is get that compelling message right, and that story about why someone should support you and why it's important to support you now. So if you can work through that need and solution equals impact and call to action, I think that will help you to do it. Yes, there are sometimes donors who do want the money to go towards a new van, or to go towards something that that's more tangible, and that's all about how you really sell that. And I think that format, and looking at how others have done it through some of the examples that we've got here, really, really help with that. And don't be put off the fact that it's by the fact that it's an ongoing project. Okay, so I'm going to move on then, and we've had a great tip here from, I think it's Laura. Another tip for Kate about highlighting the work with school groups, stressing the importance of local children learning about their local heritage in a hands-on way. Again, that's another great way of sort of bringing the individuals into it. So moving in then, so having sort of come up with your core proposition, it's about crafting your messages and really getting people's attention. And there's lots of different ways that you can do this. So it could be through a killer fact. So, for example, the the Forever Hound Trust, who we'll take a look at shortly, identified some key stats for their campaign. So they identified that over 10,000 greyhounds had been surplus to requirements by the UK racing industry. Over 2,000 greyhound litters are registered to race each year, but many of these disappear before they reach the racetrack, discarded to due to a lack of speed. And over 1,000 greyhounds last year were killed on economic or behavioural grounds. So they came up with their key killer facts to get that attention. It's a bit like going back to the example in South London Cares, the 2.9 million older people in the UK who feel that they have no one to turn to when times are hard. Or if you have a look at the killer fact here, did you know there's a seasonal rise in incidents of domestic abuse over the Christmas period? So again, using those stats to really get attention. Other examples would be using images, using video to get the attention, particularly if it's on social, that will help you stand out. Other examples might be endorsement quotes for your organisation or for your project or your approach, maybe from one of your key influencers or your high-profile supporters, or even one of your beneficiaries. Your storytelling, of course, so using the story of an individual to bring to life the challenges that you're addressing and the positive outcomes that you're achieving. And those case studies and stories can be a really powerful way to inspire support. My tip would be to keep it brief and include an image if you can. You could ask a rhetorical question. Again, that can be a way of gathering attention. You know, will you help us this Christmas to sort of insert your impact statement there. So let's just work through, again, I've got some screenshots from an example here. Again, going back to the Haven, Wolverhampton. So first things first, they actually did a bit of a test. They sent their email on a Saturday to avoid competing with other mail. And they had a strong subject line. So, so you can see it's sort of there, Jack wants to tell you what he wants for Christmas, sort of captures the interest. You can see the kind of preview screen supporting the Haven Jack story, and then read Jack's letter to Santa. And then when you click into the email itself, you can see it. So, you know, this personal story written by Jack, obviously names have been changed, with some pictures, and finishing up with that question, will you help make Christmas special? And you can read through it yourself, but it's in Charlie's words, it's in Charlie's writing. Some of the things, you know, talks about some of the things he experienced, the sad things. Before I came to the Haven, I was sad because Charlie was hurt his paw and Dad hurt his legs. Mum was always crying because we never had any money. I like it now because Mum smiles more. I miss Charlie. Maybe some colouring books and an MP3 player. And so, you know, and he's looking forward to when he leaves the Haven and can have a new pet. So, you know, there's a positive message, and almost coming back to one of the earlier questions here from Zoe about how do you avoid the pity narrative. I think telling honest, authentic stories from the words of your beneficiaries, but in a way that demonstrates them looking to a positive future is one way that you can do that. So I think a good use of a personal story and use of email there. For those, you know, I know not all of us are working with individuals, so I think that this one here, an environmental charity, using the images, and a clear impact statement about what was achieved. And some personal stories here, examples from Dorset Blind Association. So again, images, really clear, with pull-out quotes about what has it enabled someone to do. So here in the words of people who have been helped, so let's say Jess on the top right, the DBA Social Club has helped me accept my sight loss. It's nice to be around people who have experienced similar things. So telling things in people's own words, using those images and the kind of consistent, you can see there's a consistency of the images throughout all of them, telling the stories of different people from all walks of life who have accessed different things, and with that core message about doubling your donation, and linked to, you know, supporting people like Adam or supporting people like Jess, and Jess's story. So you can capture people's attention, but it's also about maintaining that interest and actually, however you're communicating, whether it's in 140 characters for Twitter, whether it's a longer email, some tips that can help you with that. It's not enough to grab your audience's attention these days. You've got to keep them engaged. So some things that can help with that are using plain English, short, familiar words. You know, just remembering this is a very different style of writing to a grant application. So you need to use active verbs, put your reader in the story. You know, we saw the example from The Haven and from South London Cares where it was we and you and us. And inspiring action by making the donor part of that story, making them the hero, if you'd like, and exciting them about how they can make a difference and different ways that they can support your work. Again, those stories of individuals can help convey the passion. They can say things that you might feel reluctant to say directly, but actually in their words it can be incredibly powerful. And remember, you know, you can pepper those calls to action throughout, but make sure at the end of it it's really clear what you want people to do. Donate, double your donation, and the link. And your link, you want to make it as easy as possible, so don't get them to click through to your website to then find the link. Just link directly to your project page where they can donate. So let's look at an example. So I mentioned the Forever Hounds Trust earlier, and we'll just work through that in a little bit more detail. So they they spent a bit of time developing a central messaging concept, which was all around beating the odds, which, you know, has a connection to racing, and obviously greyhounds being the core focus of their campaign here. And again, they came up with those key facts that I mentioned. So just the scale of the amount of dogs the challenges there means that thousands of retired greyhounds might face a very uncertain future. So the odds are stacked against them, which is where that concept of beating the odds came from. And their sort of positioning of that was that, you know, the odds are against a racing greyhound reaching the most important finish life of their career, which is a safe and loving forever home. And they came up with their key statistics, they came up with their messaging to demonstrate how those odds are stacked against them, and then made sure that those messages were consistent across all of the different channels that they were using, whether that was for video, for social media, for website, on their Big Give page, making sure there was that consistency and recognition. And I suppose the key learning they took from the 2018 Christmas challenge was keeping on top of the technology, keeping on top of this latest social media trend was challenging. They had a lack of resource in that area. So they tried, that was a little bit trial and error for them. So they used a boomerang to create a GIF of a greyhound jumping, and it generated some engagement, but it concluded it really wasn't worth the time invested. They'd produced some graphics for Instagram, and it probably wasn't in the optimum format. So this year they're planning to involve a social media volunteer at the planning stages. The other thing they learned was about making it clear how the match funding pot worked. So their communications had focused very heavily on the double your donation. They were over the moon to actually exhaust their matching pot only a few days into the challenge. So making sure that that their communications reflected that sort of could be updated once the pot had been exhausted was quite important. And you can see I've just taken some screenshots of some of their graphics there. So they had their save the date, again reiterating that message, one donation twice the impact, just a short statement about donate to the appeal and your donations will be doubled, making clear that it's between that time. They created 2 videos. So they trialed 2 different videos. They used some free software called WeVideo. They had to do it in-house, and they were able to access through that software some copyright and royalty-free music that they added as a soundtrack. So they trialed 2 different messages, a hard or a soft campaign message. So from the left, they had a harder hitting version, had a loud heavy metal soundtrack, some shocking statistics and images of dogs racing. And on the right, they had a softer version, which had focused on ex-racers enjoying their retirement and had an upbeat ukulele soundtrack. Now, both videos contain the same ask. They directed people to the Big Give website. And interestingly, they found the harder hitting video resulted in more donations, but the softer one generated more comments and engagement on social media and helped them to get their message further. So actually both angles proved really useful to the appeal. I think that's just quite interesting in terms of thinking about how you adapt your messaging. And actually for you, it might be about trialing and testing 2 different approaches. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And for their social media output, they produced a visual post that could sum up the purpose of the appeal in a single graphic. So they created a visual comparing greyhounds on a track compared to those enjoying their retirement, which summed up very simply what the charity does. So help us transform these into these. And when this was posted on Twitter and Facebook, it got a lot of engagement, created more shares, and it actually created a lot more shares than those that created a straightforward single image and copy. And in this example, I think it used quite straightforward sentences, just 2 lines explaining the appeal and how people could support. But there is something about showing that before and after. So again, connecting it to the impact that the charity and therefore your donor with their donation creates. So I hope you found this useful, just to see how some other organisations have approached it, and to get some ideas and inspiration for sort of developing some of your campaign messages and propositions. We've got about 10 minutes left. If people have questions, I'm happy to take them. There's a couple of Q&As that have come through that I'm going to leave to Rachel around donation links and campaign banner dimensions. Rachel will answer those on the chat or in the Q&A. But in the meantime, if you've got questions about with any aspect to sort of coming up with your propositions, then please do ask away. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions relating to the subject, but I will leave the webinar open because there's a few sort of technical ones coming through that Rachel's responding to. Just a reminder that the webinar's resource for recordings is in the support section of your account area. So you can, if you've missed the other webinars, then you can catch up on them there. And just to finish up on some final tips from the Big Give. So a reminder of those dates and a reminder of the fact that the pledge funds are used to double donations first. If you've got any follow-up questions from today, the info address is the best one to get in touch with. And finally, I thought I had a slide deck with the upcoming webinar dates, but I don't. You should be able to book those, and I think Rachel has been sending emails out with details for that. Our next one is on coming up a little bit later this week. It's on the 24th, same time, same place, your desk or your computer. And that will be with my colleague Lindsay on all of the promotional channels that you could be thinking about for your Christmas challenge campaign. So thank you all for all of your questions and your contributions. That's been really, really helpful. And we'll hope to see you on another webinar soon. Thank you very much.